Charlton Heston. These are my good friends, Miss Jane Wyman, Mr. Arthur Franz, and Mr. Randolph Scott. Our purpose here is to quote from the Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 4, verse 9, the Cain and Abel story. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? The answer the world's religions, almost all 3,000 of them, give to that question is simple. Yes, you are your brother's keeper. Very literally, very definitely. Any time, any place, any brother. We intend to tell you the story of 3 lives. 3 lives that were saved because you believed you were your brother's keeper. Now, if you don't believe it, if you think Genesis 4, verse 9 is kidding or perhaps means someone else, then forget it. Don't watch any further. Obviously, though, most of you do believe it. Because in the past decade and a half, your support of the United Jewish Appeal has given over 2 million human beings a chance to help themselves. This year, over 500,000 more can be given that chance. It's up to you. Frankly, we hope through this presentation to convince you that you must give them that chance. We hope you'll continue to say yes to that question, am I my brother's keeper? As for the people who were saved, we've chosen 3 stories out of those 2 million. Mr. Arthur Franz will tell you his story of the people who cured a doctor.
This is all about a sick doctor. I'll call him Dr. Martin Stein. That's close enough. The doctor was the resident internist in the 2nd largest hospital in Berlin. He started to get sick one day in 1934. He got sicker in 1939, but there was more use in a practicing physician than in a cake of soap. So the doctor ended up here instead of here. After the U.S. Army had put some flesh on the 90 pounds of bone the Germans had left him, the doctor landed here. He resumed practice almost immediately and kept going until he was given the chance to leave the displaced persons camp and start over in the United States. Then they washed him and scrubbed him and checked his literacy and his liver and gave him the results to sign in triplicate. A member agency of the United Jewish Appeal made an affidavit that he would not be a public charge, and they shipped him. On the base of this statue, there is a plaque. On the plaque are words written by a woman named Emma Lazarus. They read the words in 6 languages over the ship's loudspeaker system. When they read it in German, the doctor was at the prow, very lonely, very frightened. He heard,
Gebt mir eure Müden, eure Armen, eure unterdrückten Massen.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. The doctor was crying a little when they hit Ellis Island. You see, they had burned his wife and his 2 children in the ovens, and he was alone in a place where someone could write words like these. So he had to cry a little. The doctor was 51 and held 3 medical degrees. He worked in this hospital first as an orderly, then as an intern while he waited to take the state board examination. At 52, he graduated. If you've needed a doctor lately, you know how rushed they are. But the shortage worked in Dr. Stein's favor. With your help, he found a small town upstate where there wasn't any doctor at all. He took over for a general practitioner who had died after 30 years in harness. A lot of the time, the doctor had been paid in butter and honey instead of money. That kind of a deal. Actually, the doctor more or less combined the functions of doctor, priest, and psychiatrist. These were pretty big shoes to fill. And the doctor didn't speak English too well to begin with.
So, you take these 3 times a day after you have eaten.
Are them those little white pills?
No, these are in capsules.
Them little white pills made me feel just great.
These must have been a mild sedative, phenobarbital. You have a low-grade infection now. You can't take them.
How do you know I have what's this?
From your sedimentation rate. The speed by which your blood separates.
Dr. Adams used to give me the little white pills.
but for a different complaint. I'll be back tomorrow. Rest as much as you can.
Is it all right?
It's nothing organic. You don't have to worry. It's a little congestion, but the heart is perfectly sound.
In other words, I have a cold. I thought lying myself down like this was nonsense.
Now, Mother, at 40, you'd call it a cold. At 80, it's a congestion. Now, you stay in bed until you're told to get up.
Well, Jim's father never talked to me like that.
I can afford to. I only see you once a day and for a few minutes.
I'm a little short on cash, but there's 3 dozen fresh leghorns here and 2 pounds of churned butter.
That is very kind of you. You pay me when you can. You see, I eat in a drugstore. I have no place to cook in my room.
Good morning.
Ernest, take that coat off. I'm sorry, Doctor.
Of course. Thank you.
Shame on you. Look at your face.
Now, you stay put now.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Why does he wear such a funny coat?
He's a foreigner. That's why.
Well, that's the way it was. It went on like that, sometimes good, sometimes bad, for 2 years. The doctor got to be the school doctor, and the Upstate County Medical Association asked him to lecture once. But you couldn't say his progress in taking the place of Dr. Adams in the people's hearts was anything but slow. Until one day, just before the big high school football game, a fast freight hit a bus carrying 40 students. 3 kids were killed outright, and most of the others were badly hurt. There wasn't any hospital in the town, and it took several hours for the ambulances to rush south from the county seat with doctors and nurses. So Dr. Stein took over. He organized a first aid corps. He showed the farmers how to apply tourniquets, relieve shock, make splints. He set dozens of fractures, administered sedation, sewed torn flesh, improvised a transfusion. Then for 3 days and nights worked with the upstate surgeons to save the lives of the critically injured. Then he collapsed. Everyone agreed that forgetting his ability as a doctor, if he hadn't kept his head and organized everybody the way he did and worked with such incredible speed, there would have been a dozen dead instead of 3. Everyone agreed about it, and things were a lot warmer for the doctor. But no one really said too much until the day of the high school graduation in February. There had been a lot of buzzing that the doctor couldn't quite put his finger on before that.
Before we hear from our valedictorian, Mrs. Lila Armstrong, president of the Women's Thursday Club, has something to say to us. Mrs. Armstrong?
Ladies and gentlemen, students, honored guests, I will make this very brief because I don't want to stir up memories of the tragedy that befell our town last November. All of us know whom we have to thank that wasn't the worst tragedy. Anyway, we were sitting at the Thursday Club one Thursday when Mrs. Adams said how her son Jim had tried to pay off her sick bill with eggs and butter, only the doctor didn't have any place to cook. So we got to thinking and talking, and then we remembered the old Hodkins place down by the station, which was empty and needed fixing. So we got to fixing and collecting. Anyway, what with the raffle right after New Year's, which you so generously patronized, and several anonymous donations and sizable contributions, Well, anyway, Doctor, here's the deed to the Hodkins house. You'll have a place to cook now.
So the doctor had traveled 3,000 miles from persecution, imprisonment, and death to a strange people, a new language, and many minor difficulties. And in 3 years, these people had opened their pockets and their hearts to him and gave him a home.
That's the story of our brother Martin Stein, doctor of medicine, whose life you saved. This year, under our U.S. immigration laws, about 5,000 Jewish displaced persons will be permitted to enter the United States. Help them to become useful citizens. Help them to help themselves. Now let me read to you from Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. Now Miss Jane Wyman will tell you of affliction and deliverance in our own day in her story, The Old Lady Who Waits.
High above the harbor in Haifa, Israel, there's an old people's home. Here married couples, widows, and widowers of many nationalities, all aged, all dependent, have reached their homeland. Here in the autumn of their lives, they are able to look out upon this great Jewish port and feel a wonderful satisfaction and tranquility, knowing that in their lifetime they have seen what they believe is Yad Elohim, the hand of the Lord, come to their defense. In a clean little room overlooking the sea, surrounded by things that are dearest to her, an old lady sits in a wheelchair and looks out across the Mediterranean toward Europe. Her name is Mrs. Vodny, Mrs. Karl Vodny. She comes from Prague in Czechoslovakia, and she will be 87 years old this year. I know why the old lady spends her waking hours sitting here and watching the horizon, but I'm going to get her to tell you. It may hurt her a little bit to talk about it, but it will do us a lot of good to hear it. Mrs. Vodny, will you tell us how you came to Israel?
It's not such a story. We lived in Prague when it was the Anschluss, and then after that, Munich. My husband, Karl, knew it was only a matter of time. He got me out.
Did he manage to get out?
He stayed too long. He was shot. My oldest son wrote. I have the letter.
I want to ask you about your children. How many are there?
There are Carl Jr., David, who was killed, and my daughter, Maria.
David was the oldest?
Yeah. After my husband was gone, David went into the Czech army. When they surrendered to the Germans, he went into the Polish army. And when they surrendered to the Germans, he went into the partisans. He's buried somewhere in Ukraine.
And Carl Jr. and Maria?
They lived through the occupation and the war somehow, with help from Christian neighbors, with money smuggled in by the United Jewish Appeal.
Are they married?
Yeah, with families. I have 7 grandchildren. Before I die, I would like to see them. At least, I would like to know that they all live in peace after I am gone. I think the letters I write them and the letters I receive every week is all that keeps me alive.
Hello, Mrs. Vodny. Time for you to take some sun.
Shalom, Rabbi. I didn't expect you today.
There's no law. A man can't change his schedule. I was passing by. I dropped in.
Anything wrong?
Of course not. A man doesn't run like a timetable. Something is wrong. Go on. Enjoy the sun.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Something is wrong.
Yes.
You didn't just happen to pass by.
No.
Is anything wrong with Mrs. Bodney's family?
Every week she writes. Every week Carl Jr. and Maria answer her. For 7 years now, while they've been waiting their turn to come to Israel. These are her last 3 letters to them. They all came back. The words Adresa Neznama mean address unknown.
Adresa Neznama. Address unknown. And so Mrs. Bodney perhaps has no children to join her in Israel, but you and I can be her children by assuring her care in her autumn days. And for all those who get the chance to reach Israel, we can extend the promise of hope.
The hope that lifts the hearts of anxious millions is the knowledge that the door of Israel stands wide open to every Jew in need of refuge. We must keep that door open. If there is a new wave of refugees, Israel must be ready. Now, I'll read another verse, and then we'll tell you the story of our third life, a life that has that hope in it. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 17. Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem. Farther on in this story, we find the words, And next unto them repaired Zadok, the son of Bana. Oddly enough, there is a man named Zadok. He came originally from eastern Yugoslavia. And Mr. Randolph Scott, who rarely ventures east of the Arizona border, has kindly offered to tell us about him. Mr. Scott and his story of Reuben Zadok.
I really don't feel too far from home with this story because it takes place in a desert called the Negev, about 8,000 miles from Arizona, but not too different otherwise. I'll tell you about Zadok and his desert. We'll start in Yugoslavia. This is Zadok in 1945, standing in front of his home in Belgrade. Incidentally, that's his son. Zadok and his friends in 1946, in front of his home in a West Germany DP camp. Zadok and his friends in 1948 at his home in the British detention camp on the island of Cyprus. Zadok today in front of his home in Israel, some 60 miles north of Tel Aviv. The kid has grown, hasn't he? When Zadok first saw where he was to live in Israel, the first home he had had in 5 tormented years, he felt desolate and lost. He had come 2,000 miles to live in a tent. He felt that Israel, the dream of his life, was a big disappointment. Zadok was sick. The dry rot of despair and years of privation had weakened his will. Life around him was being built, but he was deaf and blind to it. There was in this camp, among other activities, a school for welders. They came and asked Zadok to go to their school. They needed him. They needed welders. But Zadok's sickness was too great. He had been an accountant, and he had worked with pencil and paper and figures, and inside his head, but to be an accountant in Israel without knowing the language was an impossible task. Zadok said no to them. He wanted to be left alone. He was concerned only with himself, not with the needs of his brothers. And what were their needs? And why were welders so important? And what has all this to do with the desert? This is the state of Israel. It's just about the size of the state of New Jersey, 8,000 or so square miles. This area here is called the Negev, meaning dry and arid, in short, desert. Zadok doesn't realize yet that more than half of Israel is desert, and that without water it will remain desert, and that the people of Israel will remain without enough food to go around. Now, the key to the production of food is water. Our friend Zadok has never seen Los Angeles City's San Fernando Valley. It looked like this until the big pipeline from the Colorado River made this possible. Now, Israel has its own pocket-sized Colorado. It's called the Yarkon River. And if it can be made to flow into the desert instead of into the ocean, it would raise the water supply in the desert from 3 billion to 35 billion gallons every year. This is what they're doing now. They are turning a river. The hands of unskilled labor, refugees from 18 countries. They are turning a river from its course. But what's Zadok thinking? Only of himself, only of his own task, of his own terrible suffering and pain? How long can he be blinded to what is needed of him? And they need welders to fuse the irrigation pipe together, to carry the water, to make the desert of the Negev bloom, to grow food, to take one further step toward making Israel self-sufficient. To some it comes slowly, and even those who are helped must help in turn.
Papa, how could I fill this? Papa, if there isn't enough for us, how will there be enough for the new people who are coming to Israel?
Well?
I want to be taught.
That's the story of Reuben Zadok, whose name we found in the book of Nehemiah, in a chapter which significantly concludes with the words, "And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work." With your help, the good work of saving lives and building democracy can be continued.